I'm going to make my introduction short because we're late getting started. I've known Mary for quite a few years. I think you're really going to enjoy what she has to say. It's very, for me, what she writes about really strikes a hard chord, and we've talked about that a couple of times. So I'm going to let her tell you about her as she gets going in her presentation. So Mary Collins.
Thank you, Jacqueline. Thank you so much. Can you hear me okay through the mic? Good, good, good. Well, this is great because East Coast is meeting West Coast. I'm from Connecticut, and I know Jacqueline because I have been to many events over my 35-year career, and the Cape Cod Writer Conference and program that Jacqueline ran in the summer was the best that I've ever been to. So when she contacted me after no contact for many years, I was like, I'll come to wherever you are, because she's just amazing. And what I just heard from this group was amazing. We all need each other creatively. It's very isolating to be a creative person, I think, in American society. I'm constantly, in the summer I teach at their Yale Summer Nonfiction Writing Program, and they come from all over the world, actually. And one of the first things they always say in the workshop is, no one I know understands why I'm writing. And I'm in a lot of isolation, so unless I'm in a writer's group, most of the people in my everyday life don't understand why am I working on X and Y. So the first thing I wanted to do is just compliment all of you for being here for each other, because you need each other to keep feeling that what you're doing has value. And those very skill sets that you're bringing to each other as writers and as editors in workshops are the very skill sets that I want to talk to you about today. Just very briefly, I have two completely different books on the table out there. At the Broken Places is a book that I wrote with my transgender son, and he came out 17 years ago before I'd ever even heard what that word meant, and he was the first in his high school class. And the other book was sort of a recovery book from writing such an intense topic. So we'll be talking about writing difficult topics this afternoon. And the book, Creating Writers, Creating Citizens, I taught myself to do watercolor. We were just talking about different art forms. And I needed whimsy again. I needed joy. I needed to feel that writing just wasn't about heavy things. And so the book with the cow on the cover was one of my favorite things I've ever done. And I ended up publishing with a small poetry press. And then I've published with Geographic. So I'm all over the map with who I publish with, and every project has a home. If you've got a passion for it, it will be a home. And don't let anyone judge you about the home that it has. Oh, well, you wrote with National Geographic. Why are you going with a small poetry press? Well, it's a different project, right? So that's the other thing I loved when you give your demonstrations about what you've all been up to. You've got a huge range of where you're publishing and what you're doing, and all of it's valid. It's very easy for people to tell you that it's not. So let's do the first slide, if you could. Sure. Is this better? Perfect. And welcome to the people on Zoom, by the way. So let's get back to those writing workshops I've been teaching for 35 years. And the kinds of skill sets that you all offer to each other when you're sharing your work. It could be in an organized workshop or not. And one of those things is you listen. And the hallmark of a good workshop is you know how to listen to each other. And what are some ways that you are a good listener when people are sharing their work with you? Well, first of all, body language, right? You're not on your cell phone in the middle of the workshop, right? You have a tendency to listen and then restate. We're in a society where that skill set is just deteriorating at an incredible rate. And I challenge you to see, even now, as you listen to me, what a good audience you are. You carry that skill as writers and editors, because to be a writer and editor, you are a listener. And our society needs you. In the playbook, Creating Writers, Creating Citizens, I am startled at the end of the book by my own revelations of, I guess in the long run, after 35 years, I'm actually creating citizens most of the time in my classes. Very few of the students go on and continue to write, even at Johns Hopkins at Yale. I found about 10%, even at the elite programs. So then what are you doing? Well, you're training someone to be a good listener, right? So that's the first thing. You remain open to suggestions. Wow. Do we need that in our society right now? Right? Everyone in this room has joined a writing group which is giving suggestions. Look about your own development as a citizen and writer are now linked. And that I can't tell you how difficult it is for my students, especially after coming out of COVID. We were talking at our table about this cohort that came through COVID in high school. Their capacity to listen is deeply impaired, and their capacity to remain open to suggestions is impaired. They follow things that mirror what they think in all their social media. And then you get them into a writing scenario, and you're now saying to them, I don't know. And they don't know how to receive that. But you do, because you've joined a writing group. So again, when I started the playbook project, I didn't really think I was going to be talking about being a citizen, and that's where it brought me. Respect that others might hold different values. That's crucial as well. If you think about, you were just talking about diversity. Sometimes it's hard to hear one point of view, and we can be very myopic in our work. Later in my workshop, I'm going to talk about how Beacon Press, and since some of you won't be at that workshop, I'll share a quick story of that. When we shared the book about Donald and I and his transition, I didn't want to hear from my editors at Beacon Press, you know, Mary, you sound a little angry. And I was like, well, I thought I'd really worked through that. And they're like, no. And you're like, And they made it a better book because I was like, okay, I got a tone problem in some of these essays, and I need to respect that you're hearing something that I'm not seeing. Getting my students to do that at any level. Again, I taught for 12 years at Johns Hopkins in their grad program. Then I'm at a regional university now with a lot of first generation students. And then I go to Yale in the summer, and you're like, whoa, you're all over the map. And oddly, what makes a good workshop is the same in every environment. They listen, they respect others, have different values, and let's get to this one. They understand the difference between sharing opinions and sharing stories. If my son and I had decided to write a book about sharing opinions, we wouldn't have survived the project because we were so opposed to each other at the start. Instead, we were like, I'll tell you what, when you sat at that kitchen table and you revealed to me, Mom, I'm in the wrong gender, I think I'm trans, and I stared and looked at you and said, what? And then you said, I'm not in the right gender. And I said, what? And that's kind of funny, isn't it? But if I had said, he's crazy, what's he talking about? I never heard of such a thing, and written an angry op-ed, we would not have had any middle ground. So you are also story sharers, every one of you, either in fiction or in nonfiction, on some level. And story sharing saved my family instead of sharing opinion. Well, politically, and again, I'm not even going to get into politics today. I'm talking about skill sets. Politically, we also are having trouble not sharing opinion. If we share stories, we build narrative, and we suddenly start finding some kind of common ground. Like, I don't understand you, right? That's what I'm saying to him. And that was really huge. Yes, a very amazing citizen set, skill set up there. Let's go to the next slide. And then the next one, the power of listening. The average person only recalls 10% of what they hear. I bet everyone in this room is way above that average. I bet because you're writers and you seek advice from editors, you probably listen and recall 50% or more of what you hear. And in a specific moment, because your focus is good, you probably recall even 75% of what you hear. What? Our citizenry needs this hearing, listening skill set. It would be so interesting to see if you ever ran any workshops here about applying the workshop process to discussing differences in civic discourse, which is what I'm sort of pitching here. that you have a role not just as a writer, but in this larger dialogue of our life. I've done some research on this. This is all new to me, by the way. I'm really enjoying talking about it as a topic. The workshop I have this afternoon, I've talked about that topic a lot for the last 7 or 8 years. But this is really exciting to me. Better listeners make better readers and writers. And studies show listening skills predict success better than reading skills or aptitude tests. So the other thing for yourself as a writer, even if you're not interested in the civic side of this discussion, is when you go into a workshop, you need to prepare yourself to be the listener. And in a classic Iowa writing workshop, NMFA workshop, the writer sits in total silence and everyone talks about their writing. I don't do that anymore. Most students aren't equipped to handle that. Most people are not equipped to handle that. So I sort of break it up. You know, the group talks, but then the author has a chance to speak. How many of you been in a workshop with the Iowa format where you are the author and you say nothing? Yeah. I'm surprised that even half of you are doing that. It's no longer the trend anymore, but it does get to the point where you are the writer, you've put your story on the page, and now you're hearing audience response, and you need to just take it in. So I really love that. Next slide, please. So let's talk about being a writer in a workshop. As I've mentioned, I've taught for decades at this point. I'm getting old. And I've been really struck, again, first generation students at a regional school. People with amazing books at Yale that need to push it from book proposal to final submit, right? I'm doing them all in the same year. And the same issues come up in the workshops, no matter the level. There's 3 core skill sets that we never break down in a workshop in practice. Giving edits, receiving edits, and processing all the editorial feedback that you've just been given. If you really want your work to strike fire, you need to be good at all 3 of these. Most people are good at only one. So I like breaking it down because it's such a crucial aspect of it. What do you gain when you give edits? What percentage of you, let's hear also from the people online. I don't know if there's, if we can do that. What percentage of you would say when you're in a writing workshop, you actually feel most confident being the editor, not the writer? How many of you would say, yeah, I love doing the editing part? Anybody? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Anybody online? Anybody more confident being the editor? You're giving edits. That's a really interesting thing to know about yourself, right? That you like looking at other people's work. You know, what do you gain when you do that? You read their whole work, right? That's one thing. You're respectful. I've been on TV shows where someone's done my book, a different book, American Idol, and he did a live TV show and hadn't bothered to read the book. And I was like, he would say, whoa, you know, all the kids should join sports. And I'm like, well, no, the book said the opposite of that. It was the most embarrassing on-air interview I've ever had. So when you're a good editor, you're reading the whole thing, right? What else? What are some other hallmarks from the crowd here of what does it mean when you're in a workshop where you feel like this editor is doing a good job? They are listening, they are responding to my work. What are the hallmarks of that subset skill in your workshops? Anybody? Yeah, what do you think?
I think, sorry, I dropped my crochet hook. Put it closer. Okay. For me, like the part that's fun for me as an editor, and certainly the thing that can be really painful as a writer is, did the editor take time to understand what I was trying to say, or are they projecting what they want me to say?
That's a great comment. Let's do at least one more. Where do you feel like, where would you identify for yourself, that person's a good editor of my work? So that is so crucial in good writing workshops. Yeah.
I would say that it's not taken personal, that the comment is like objective, that there doesn't seem to be any kind of personal there.
Wonderful. That is such a great comment. And in my Writing the Difficult workshop, I'm going to talk about how once you put your personal story out there, you got to start learning not to take all this stuff personally, because they're going to take your story and they're going to run with it, and you're going to just watch it happen. And so you can't take personal when people, I mean, oh, you don't want to look up my name and all the terrible things they've said about me online after reading At the Broken Places. And I don't care, because we again, I'll talk later about why we did that book. Receiving edits. What are some of the challenges? And again, even though I'm talking about you as writers, I'm also talking about us as a society. We have trouble receiving outside feedback, right? Of any difference. You cannot move forward as a writer if you cannot receive outside point of view. And in my two biggest successes in the last 2 summer workshops at Yale were people that we completely overhauled their structure. That's a big decision, isn't it? And it shifted them from, I've had a book for 6 years and it went nowhere, to I sold it and I'm all set to go and it's coming out this year. That happened to 2 of the authors when they heard the writing workshop say, your structure doesn't work and here's why. And after working for 6 years on something, you're like, well, it better work because that's too big of a change, right? That's how you're going to want to respond. I can't handle it. In her case, her boyfriend had died in an avalanche in college and they never found him. And 30 years later, some news reporter calls her and said, we found the backpack. That was buried in like page 200 in the book. I was like, can you open the book with the contents of the backpack, please? Bam, agent took it in a second. And it was this beautiful love story. And she goes to med school and she has to work with a cadaver as she's hearing about the death of her boyfriend, and they never find the body. And it's just this gorgeous, and then we used Gray's Anatomy to structure the chapters. That was at a workshop. She didn't come to that on her own. That's okay, right? We need each other. That's why you're here today. We need each other. So how good are you? And this is a self-assessment for yourself at receiving edits. When I do workshops, people who are poor at that second level never get where they want to go. Especially if they're really serious about the work and they want an advance and they want an agent, dead in the water if they're not receiving edits. So you personally, I mean, as I'm doing the talk, sort of look at yourself. Well, is that a weakness for me? Processing editorial feedback on your own work, the final of the 3, right? Sometimes you could be in a workshop, it's usually about 10 people for me, and then you get the professor's comments and you've got 10 people's feedback and 1 other's, right? So how do you process so much feedback, right? What do you weigh what's given? Let's get a couple of answers in here, 1 or 2, either online or in here. How do you handle, I've just been given so much feedback. How do you sort? Do you have a toolkit for sorting? You have to create a toolkit for writing. You have to have a toolkit for receiving edits. Otherwise, you're like, well, this isn't where I wanted to go, or I'm not going to listen to that, or, oh, I guess I better make all these changes and it ruined my project. Right? So how do you know, right? I'm always amazed in my gen ed classes at Central. I intentionally teach 1st and 2nd year students at least once a year because I want to see how this new generation is doing. And they've never done any creative writing. And I love it. I absolutely love them. And they'll get feedback from someone who's never done creative writing. And then I come in, I've been doing this for 30 years. And I'll say, so how did you receive and process all the editorial feedback? Well, Joey told me to do X. I said, okay, well, did you read my feedback? No. I said, well, I've been doing this for 30 years. Okay. How about, you don't have to take my feedback. Can we start with who might have a credible response here and then process it? So any comments in here? Have you thought much about how do I process all this feedback I'm getting, right?
So I've been working on this novel for 12 years, and it's being published, self-published in June. But I can tell you what happened along the way is that I actually hired people and paid people to help me edit this novel, and it turned into their work. And I didn't have the discernment at the time to realize that they were changing the tone of my novel. And so therefore I had to start from scratch. And when I hired the last writing coach to help me just pull this baby out, like deliver this baby after being pregnant for 12 years, I explained this to her, and I then had the discernment to tell her, no, we're not doing that. We're not changing that name because it doesn't matter. We're not.
Good. I really appreciate that process, right? Where you're actually not just learning as a writer, But you're learning that I didn't train myself on how to receive feedback so that I held on to the core of my project. Just a show of hands, how many of you feel that you're working on a project where you're having trouble receiving a lot of feedback and you don't know where to go with it? Anybody in here feeling sort of stuck on that level? Just a little bit? Because that can be very discouraging. And you have to be careful. I mean, a lot of times it can be like, oh, go to and get another workshop. I have people that I see who are like, what would you call it, addicted to workshops, but they actually don't actually finish their work because they give edits, they receive edits, but they never process edits, or they lose track of what they were doing in their own project. So I really think this is a very, very important topic to really chat about. Great. Yeah, please, that'd be great.
Jill says it's important to consider every comment. I like to reflect on the suggestion, go back to the story, and see if that suggestion makes sense. I find it has always jump-started the creative juices for me, and the changes have been the best.
Wonderful. And who was this? Joe, thank you, Joe. That's really thoughtful. And obviously when you're getting consistent, right? Your book sounds a little angry, Mary. Then they give it to another editor at Beacon. I think it's a little got a tone problem, Mary. And by the time I got to the third area, yeah, you got a tone problem. I can't keep saying, no, it doesn't. Right? You can't do that. You're going to be like, okay, I better work on that. Yes.
Thank you. It just made me think of a story. Many years ago, I had an opportunity to meet Carl Reiner, and he told me, we were both from the Bronx. He told me a story. Late 50s, early 60s, he had this pilot, and it was just his passion project, and he put everything into it. It was called Head of the Family, and they presented it to CBS, and CBS hated it, and they rejected it. And he said he was devastated. And they said, all right, what can I take from this? And he went back and they reworked it. And then a year later, they represented it and it became the Dick Van Dyke Show. So take feedback when it's from.
Yes, I love that story. And also that they didn't quit on their project just because they were intimidated by the editorial feedback. So that's another portion of the processing point, right? That they didn't quit on it, overwhelmed, saying, I keep getting bad advice. We have, what's your name? Sequoia saying, they steered me wrong, they steered me more, but that didn't keep Sequoia from coming back and saying, wait a minute, I've rediscovered my own novel and now it's where I want it and now I'm ready to publish it. You didn't quit on it, even though you were having trouble processing editorial feedback. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Yeah, let's see the next one. Because these are just titles. So yeah. Yeah, before I get to that one, I did want to, there was another one on, did we miss it? We'll go forward one. I might have them right out of order by one. Okay, yeah, we'll do this one, then we'll go back. I wanted to talk about one simple story about opinion versus story sharing. Again, you might be looking at this in your own work, but more importantly, as people coming out of a writing group, a very prestigious writing group, people on the East Coast know about you guys, by the way. They read the Writer's Digest, they read the Writer's Chronicle. We see your ads in there. I wouldn't be a bit surprised if you didn't get people submitting your stuff. So they know about you. And so my book, American Idol, A Journey Through Our Sedentary Culture, I had a devastating bicycle accident that was helicoptered from the scene, and I was a Jane Doe. And the only reason why I survived is I was in great shape, so I didn't break my neck, but I was in bad way. And when I came out of all that, I thought the story was going to be about me. I was going to write about my helicopter ride, which I couldn't remember actually because I was out of it. And so I wrote like 50 or 60 pages about this crazy experience of being a Jane Doe, and they had to go through the phone book and call people, hoping I mentioned Jim Collins, and that was my brother. But I came out of it thinking the book was about me. I received editorial feedback. Not a good idea. This is getting boring after 20 pages. So I'm sorry, I had the accident, and you can't move on your right side and all that, but I recovered. But then I was like, oh, all right. Well, maybe my mistake is that I'm having a big, strong opinion about city planning because I got in an accident with a car and poor city planning, and I'm really angry. that anger thing again. And then I was like, that's not the book. Maybe what I need to do is find some people who can share stories with me, that can talk to me about city planning, that can talk to me about what happens when you can't move and you get depressed, right? Because it affects the dopamine in your brain. I mean, I was a heavy worker, I was a college athlete. So all of a sudden not being able to move changed everything. It really affected me. So I began to seek characters for each chapter and each topic and ask them to story share about what they knew about city planning, what they knew about how movement impacts the brain, and suddenly I had a book. So first of all, I had process and listened, right? Taken the idea, stopped talking about myself, and decided to story share versus arguing. We need to change city planning in America. It's really bad. People are lazy, blah, 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 which none of that was accurate, by the way, by the time I did the research in the book. And it was through story sharing that I came through a much more profound understanding. So let's go back one slide. So back to the listening thing. There's so many podcasts out there, okay? And the audience for podcasts rose 41% during COVID, which is no surprise. But hearing is not the same as listening. And I see that firsthand in my classes with students 18 to 25 for sure. Okay, they're there, but they're not really listening. And listening requires you to interpret, evaluate, and respond. Interpret, evaluate, respond. As a group of writers, didn't we just talk about how that's exactly what you do in a writing workshop? So this is my call to you as citizens in a country that has unbelievably toxic public discourse, no matter what your political, I don't even care what your political affiliation, it's the quality of the discourse that has declined. I really do argue that you bring such a special skill set. There are so many civic possibilities. And while reflecting in the book, A Playbook, Creating Writers, Creating Citizens, I decided I wanted to go and look for nonpartisan groups that were involved with how to use these skill sets. My students don't know how to handle a difference of opinion. My students are afraid to express their opinion. Their idea of an edit is, well, I liked that. And it's like, that's not of service to the writer. So when I ask them, well, interpret the paragraph, evaluate the paragraph, respond to the paragraph in question on this person's piece of writing, they struggle mightily. So I am trying to get started in my own state. There's a Connecticut branch of Braver Angels in my state. It's a totally nonpartisan group that is trying to improve public discourse. That's it. Brings them together and they story share. They have Republicans and Democrats story sharing about very hot topics, race, diversity and equity, you name it. But they story share. They don't opinion share. And again, because I'm in a smart group of writers, I know you know what I'm talking about because you're all storytellers. Okay? So in my American Idol book, I knew I had to move from opinion to story sharing. These organizations, Braver Angels, is nationwide. They have a wonderful series of ways for you get some training, and they would welcome people who've been in writing workshops, who have led writing workshops, because they run programs that tap into every skill set that we just discussed. Another one that I loved was Hands Across the Hills, where they deliberately chose families and made them switch houses. And this one was on 60 Minutes. Again, I felt like, especially Braver Angels, but even Hands, I felt like I was in a writing workshop. I was like, look at that, look at that. They got to listen to each other. They have to share stories. They have to receive feedback. They have to process the feedback. You guys are in a writing workshop and you just don't know it, right? So, yes. Yeah, these are just a little, PowerPoint. They're just a little sketch for me. You can see I'm improvising here. But of course, so I'm hoping this is making you think in a new way about your civic role as a writer, that as you work as a creative artist in many mediums, you have, I probably totally unconsciously developed a skill set that's never been more needed. I have a deep feeling for that. And I'm seeing it in my classes and in my students and their inability to actually share a story with each other, to listen to a story with each other, or to face anybody who doesn't agree with their point of view. They have no skills. And that's a devastating trend. So if you are a writer of any level, where you feel like, yeah, I'm pretty good at this. I'm pretty good at receiving, listening, evaluating, giving feedback. Offer a workshop at your public library and be like, who would like a workshop on story sharing, not writing, because that intimidates them. Oh, well, I'm not a writer. I don't self-identify. Jim was in here and I was talking about, I don't know where he is now, but I was talking about veterans, and I've worked with veterans a lot. And a lot of them have never done any writing. So if you tell them, well, you want to have to write an essay about your experiences in Vietnam, I'm like, I don't know how to do that. But if you interview them and then make it into a transcript and then coach them through how to make it an essay or story, it's fine. So this idea of telling people, let's come have a story sharing workshop at my library about some political topic, and you're not allowed to share opinions. So let's go back to the table with my trans son. He comes out to me and says, Mom, I'm in the wrong body. And again, now everybody knows this, but really totally blindsided. Wow, if I share that story, even if you think that being trans is crazy, it's still moving. It's still moving that he was in so much pain. It's still moving that I didn't understand. And so when we published the book, At the Broken Places, it's a series of call and response essays, right? And we had very strong reactions to the book. Okay. The people from the gay, bi, lesbian, trans community were like, well, you should have just said yes from the beginning and been on board from the start. And I was like, well, I was confused and I didn't understand. And I'd never been through that before. And I was watching my daughter evaporate before my eyes. Okay, don't tell me that that wasn't difficult. Doesn't mean that I can't be on board, but don't tell me it wasn't difficult, okay? And other people can be like, yeah, it's totally crazy. And I'm like, that's fine. You can feel that way. It's fine. I really don't care. But you can come up and share a story with me, but do not share your opinion. So they're sharing opinions online, trust me. And I got kicked out of PFLAG groups and gay, bi, lesbian, transgender groups when I would say, I know the parent isn't on board, but please be patient. We don't want to listen to that. They should be on board immediately. And then my trans son, who's a remarkable person, even at the age of like 22, is like, that's not open-minded. You need to listen. My mom's told me that she was grieving, and now I understand, and I didn't before. 22 years old. I was like, that's incredible. But then he's sharing his story with me that, I've been hiding as a boy inside a girl's body since I was like 8. And I was like, what? You're 18 years old and now you're just breaking this news to me, right? But if he had come out and said, you just have to listen to me, this is what I'm doing, I would have shut down and been like, I'm your parent. I'm a single parent with no child support. I had nothing. And I'll mention something different about that as a writer. And I was like, you're doing what? And so, again, the story sharing saved us. And what happened when I wrote the book, a playbook, I thought, well, maybe story sharing can save our public discourse. Like, okay, this was my family story, but I'm always looking, well, how does my family story relate to something bigger? And to me, this is about how can we improve public discourse through story sharing? And this is a group of people who are writers. I love that. I mean, imagine if one of your anthologies, people from 2 opposing political parties share stories about a moment. You could pick a topic, and you have an anthology of that, of people of opposing views, only sharing stories. And then what happened was people could respond as they wished to the book. They would just see a scene and then respond. They would have their own response. But we never judged each other. I didn't edit one word out of Donald's pieces, despite the pain of reading it. I was like, that's your take on it. Okay. And it led to greater understanding and you don't have to agree on everything. That's the other thing. And the last thing I'll mention, which is to a different aside before I'd like to open this up a little bit. One thing I talk about at Yale a lot, people come in and they spend years and years on their writing, and they don't demand good advances. They don't demand pay for some of the stuff that they publish, especially nonfiction. So poetry and fiction are a little different. And I was a single parent, and up until then, I had been like that. I was like giving my writing away. Oh, I'm so happy I got published in City Paper. Oh, I'm so happy I got in the Washington Post. Yeah, a little piece. And they're like, well, we're not going to pay you because it's in the Outlook section. That's an opinion. I was like, well, it's like a 2,000-word essay. No, we don't pay for the opinion piece. And then I became a single parent in Baltimore by myself. And I was like, I'm not giving you anything if you don't give me money. And that was one of the best things that ever happened to me as a writer. because I began to value, okay, wait a minute. In some situations, I deserve something here. I'm not going to keep giving it away. So in poetry and fiction, it's a little different, but in nonfiction, I began to make sure that at least half my work was like, you're giving me money to do X. So getting away from feeling like you can just give it all away. I've developed a strong feeling about that because there's probably a lot of great writing in the room, and the internet and everything has made it easier to give it all away. And really take into account that some of your work has taken 7 or 8 years. You know, shouldn't necessarily just give it away, which is a different topic. But let's get back to this whole idea of, have I made too big of a leap? I really want your opinion on that. That I have gone from, you have been in writing workshops and you are good at these skills of listening, evaluating, responding, receiving edits. And that's exactly what we're missing from public discourse. And that there's some role that you could play in your larger community, that you actually have advanced skill sets that are in need, so that it's a civic obligation. And again, I'm working with the Braver Angels in my state in Connecticut. I made all the students in my nonfiction class go out and interview somebody with completely opposing political views. And I just asked them to do something like, why is that sign on your lawn? And I directed them, do not state an opinion about the sign, and do not respond with opinion to their story. You're just asking them, and let them deliver it. So like, a cop with the blue flag with the blue line, then someone with the Black Lives Matter. Oh, and all my colleagues are like, don't do it. It's going to blow up in your face. It's going to be so awful. They're not going to be able to handle it. They said it was one of the best things they'd ever done in college. They came back with the stories. We just set them on the table. We looked at them and they saw that there were certain threads that were common, that people were afraid, right? They were just afraid from both sides, right? Or they thought the other side was not listening to them. And I was like, oh. And so the students learned something that day, that you can go out and listen, record, receive a story, and then we made a magazine. And Braver Angels coached us through the process of interviewing people who have opinions that differ from you. Isn't that cool? I think it's really cool. And so it was my first time ever leaping from writing skill sets to that, oh, let's see what we can do civic obligation here. So questions or responses from the rest of you about what I'm sort of getting at here, which is a pretty advanced and abstract topic. I told Donna when I was talking about it, he's like, Mom, that better be a pretty advanced group of writers. I was like, well, it is. It is. So comments about your own. So 2 comments. One, how many of you feel like you do workshops here, right? The writing workshops, right? How many of you assess for yourself your 3 categories? We go back to them. What are they? Again, that you receive edits. We can go back to that slide. Actually, I want to go. Right. So receive edits, processing edits, and then processing. How many of you would say you're the best at giving edits? You can only vote on one category, by the way. How many of you are like, I'm awesome at giving edits? Okay, don't be shy. If you're a good editor, everyone will want to be in your workshop, right? right. How many of you are like, yeah, okay. Oh, so you can't vote again now. All right. So how many of you are receiving edits? Okay, that's good. And then how many are, I'm really good at processing all this feedback. Okay, but that's a slightly different subgroup. How many of you feel like you are not good at all 3, or have never thought, how many of you have never thought about these as 3 separate skills? Yeah, it's really key. I can teach an entire revision workshop on the art of processing these 3 edits, 3 edit skills. And again, if you have a book project, it usually lies in the last one, the receiving and processing, that's why you're stuck. So, and civically, how many of you are looking for better public discourse? I'm hoping everybody's hand in the room goes up, right? So let's start there. So no matter what your political views are in the room, it really doesn't matter. We have that shared feeling. We wish it was better, right? And it's not. And so I beseech you as authors and writers to know you're probably some of the most advanced citizens in your state. for having conversations. And you've probably never seen that before in yourself. And it's really important right now. And I've been talking about it in Connecticut, but it's pretty exciting to be able to come out here. And I appreciate Jacqueline letting me do that. So any questions, Q&A, we'll loosely open it up. You don't even have to talk about this. You can talk about books and projects and things like that. Any Q&A? How much time do we have? 9 or 10 minutes. Any Q&A? Yes. Let's use the mic, especially for the people.
I always thought it was great when you were in a critique group, if when you give edits, you say, this is your book, but if I were writing it, I might consider explaining it this other way. And that way you don't get the person into a defensive stance. Just a thought.
No, that's really good. We come up with like whole sheets. In fact, I can create a checklist for this if Jacqueline wanted me to do that, of ways of introducing your comments to others that is not dismissive, discounting, dictatorial, and what are some ways of doing that. In my classes, we intentionally open the semester with a very poor piece of writing, and then we all pretend to be really bad edits, and we imitate horrible feedback. And then when we're done, they're all laughing. I'm like, wasn't that awful? And I'm like, and so none of you are doing this semester that ever. And you can teach in something that fast. The dismissive thing can happen. That can be anybody else. Yeah, Rose.
You know, I have a transgender friend, a gay daughter, and other people in the community that I know, and a niece who's also gay. And I tend to be very direct, as everybody here knows. Anyway, the problem is I will want to know something about the stuff, and I tend to ask the questions in a direct fashion because I'm really interested. And the reaction is sometimes really bad. My gay niece was wearing one of those they them pens, and I was asking them about it, and I was like, and I was trying to kind of be a little bit gentle and say, my stepdaughter has a friend who wants to be a they them, and the minute I said she instead of they, she literally in the middle of a restaurant blew up, started screaming at me because I didn't say they, and stormed out of the restaurant. This is somebody I've known for years. And it's like, how do we ask these questions when you really want to know so that you can be empathetic?
Well, that's a great question, because I think I've heard that sort of episode again and again, and the issues on both sides, right? Let's go back to being writers and editors. You have asked a question. So let's say you're an editor, and that hypothetically, this person who's trans or who's going by they, them pronouns, so it might just be non-binary, has received it and they don't know how to process it. So this is a great example of a political issue where you are giving. I don't understand the they, them. Can you explain it? And once in a while I slip up, and I'm sorry. I apologize if I slip up, but I want to respect you. Okay. But instead you're like, I have this question. They receive it and they don't give you a chance to say that. They don't give you a chance to say, hey, look, I slipped up. I mean, I forget, don't get so mad at me. I'm trying. It's new to me. I never heard they, them. This is like, I'm in English. You don't use they, them, but if they can't get to the processing part of receiving that information from you, it's not on you. That level of anger, your intent, my son Donald, grandson Donald, if he were here, would tell you, if you could sense that your intent was genuine, I missed a mistake. I called you she. I apologize. I know you want they, them. He says, if you say something like that, 99% of the time, people are not going to be upset anymore because they know that your intent was to do the right thing, but it's hard for you. It's new for you. You don't know. That's different than someone coming up and saying, they, them is crazy and you need to stop doing that. And I'm not going to participate. You can have that opinion, but I wouldn't state that to a person who is using those pronouns because you are initiating confrontation. So if you know that they feel strongly about using they, them pronouns and you disagree, that's okay. the only thing you might do is say, as a story share, I get confused when you do that. Okay, that's not an opinion, that's a response. This is my story. When you do they, them, I get confused. Which is indirectly your way of saying, I don't know what the heck you're doing. Okay. But the other side is, I mean, I teach at a university. At this point, I am not exaggerating. 10% of my students are along an unusual gender continuum, a minimum. And at least, I would say 5 to 10% of my students every semester are going by they and them. Do I accept it? Yes. Do I agree with it? I'm not going to let you know. Because it doesn't matter, does it? That's what Donald just told me. It's not my personal business, actually. That's what they want to use, that's fine. If they ask me to use a new name, I have one student who changed the name 3 times in 4 semesters. Goes by Ivory now, and they, them, not he. I just made a mistake, right? So I always just ask the student, what is the best way for me to address you? Name and pronoun, and then I write it down. And if they change it, just keep me informed. Whether or not I agree with what you're doing is not my business. It really isn't. And Donald helped me through navigating all that. So I wouldn't have taken, I really hope that you didn't feel bad about yourself, that this person reacted so strongly to a modest misstep and gave you no opportunity to say, I'm sorry, I was just confused. This is difficult for me. They can't process, you got no conversation, right? So, but again, you could talk about any issue in here, race, gender, transgender, the way I've just talked about it, and avoid a lot of confrontation. Avoid a lot. Anybody else sort of reflecting on some of the things I'm bringing up? And thank you so much for letting me talk about it, because I don't usually do that. I don't usually have an audience that would be receptive to this. They always want to talk about their own.
Close. Okay, yeah, that's close enough. I want to push back or push into a little bit what you were just talking about. With a little story that I was at a meeting. It was actually a research meeting of people who were starting research projects on issues they were personally involved in. So talk about difficult topics. And one of the women at the meeting was foster care survivor. And, you know, in her 50s or, you know, well past it. But she said, people always ask us why we went into foster care. And like one of the things that I think about since then is actually there are stupid questions. Like don't, you know, sometimes you have to take a moment to think, you know, how well do I have to know somebody before I ask them what's the worst thing that ever happened to you and tell me all about it. And that's, trans people get asked a lot of stupid questions. You know, they get asked, do you have a penis? They get asked. And so it's okay to research things online instead of asking them for those explanations.
I agree with that. I think the pronoun thing is a little different, but I agree 100%. And my Donald is not here today, even though he's in Santa Fe area, because he doesn't want to be walking the rest of his life as some token trans guy who has all the answers. Like, it's really offensive to him when people come up to him and say, well, so how do trans people think about whatever? And he's like, I'm just a human being. Like, why would you think that I have all these answers? I agree with your comment completely. I feel like the pronoun issue is a little different because you're not asking a person about something related to, you know, did you get surgeries? Do you take hormones? I mean, those are deeply, terribly personal questions. Can you tell me, you know, how trans people feel about X? You're actually trying to figure out how the person wants to refer to themselves in public. Like, I want to go by, you know, they, them. And you're like, okay, good. And then sometimes I might mess up on it. But give me a chance to mess up and then tell you, I know you told me you wanted they, them, and I just need to respect that. That's a lot different than asking someone, did you have surgeries as a trans person? That's terrible, right? At book signings, people came up and asked us, you wouldn't believe these book signings. I'm going to talk about it in my workshop this afternoon. It was an unbelievable roller coaster over the 3 years that we did them. Parents coming up, hanging on me, weeping, trans people coming up and loving Donald and saying, thank you so much for telling your story. I mean, it was just this huge roller coaster, very difficult to navigate about what was okay to ask Donald or not. And we went to the medical schools. We did Yale and Cornell and a bunch of others where we would go as a parent and child. And Donald was a way better speaker than I am, by the way, so funny. And he was great about coming right at the social workers, the pre-med students saying, you guys do such a bad job when I go to the doctor's office. And he was great about how intrusive they were, how unprepared they were, how cavalier they were, how stereotyped they did things, how mistreated he felt. I was riveted. I was like, oh. And so that was our most fulfilling part of the book tour. We're actually the med schools where he was talking right at them. Don't ask me those questions when I come in. How dare you? You would never ask that of another patient, right? Or how dare you not know X? Why didn't you look at my file, right? And so that was really powerful. And it came from him. He initiated the conversation. Don't ask me this. So a lot of times people have to empower myself by saying, I'm just not going to talk about that. But the they them thing is more complicated because you're referring to them in print in a class and you got to know. You have to know. You have to ask them. So anything else? Yes.
No, I was just, any more questions? Because we probably need to start to wrap it up now. Anything for Zoom? Yes. Come on.
This is not directly related, but I was wondering if you have any advice. I have friends who I'll be talking to about a difficult conversation, thinking that I'm in a safe space, and they will get offended on behalf of someone who could be offended. And I don't know if you've met people like this. And then they shut me down and I'm like, well, wait, I wasn't trying to be offensive. And there's like no go back. There's just, no, that was offensive to this group of people who is not here. And now you can't talk about it. And I don't know what to do in that situation.
Well, to be honest, it's kind of like being in a writing workshop and you give advice to someone and they're just like blast you for giving them advice, right? They're not ready for step 2 and 3, right? So for you, it's an incredibly uncomfortable situation. I've been in that many times. Donald and I have been in that many times. And we've learned to realize, okay, the problem here isn't us. Like they've got a problem receiving and processing and they're not giving us any room to have a healthy conversation. And then what happens is they are very black and white in their thinking. You can only say X, which is the opposite of discourse. So you can choose to say nothing or say, how are we ever supposed to have constructive conversations if this is the way you're responding to me? It's all about moving that forward, right? A constructive discourse. Yeah. Okay, I don't want to run long. That's always the worst thing a guest speaker can do. So I thank you for your attention and listening, right? As we're talking about that. Thank you so much.